Welcome back to Story Deep Dive. This is Dana and Rachel. Y'all listen, we're over here with a whole slew of daggone blooper reels trying to get this podcast going. And I feel like when we hit our flow, you're not going to be able to stop us. But right now, we get all the giggles, all the fun, all the bugs and everything. So before we jump into our discussion, continuing about Ninth House, Rachel, what's going on in your StoryCypher camp over there?
We are rocking and rolling over here at StoryCypher. And when I say rocking and rolling, I mean we're trying to get to the holidays and survive the process. The Crime Writers Workbook is launched. I talked about that last week. And I've got some last Substack posts that I'm prepping for the StoryCypher publication to get us through the end of the year. We've got some video posts, which incidentally involve an interview with you coming up in a couple of weeks. And we're talking about our masterwork is going to be Mistborn for this month, and just keeping it exciting over at the StoryCypher publication. What you got going on over there? You're always busy. You always have something going on. So spill the tea.
First of all, I feel like my funny bone is tickled to the umpteenth degree. So if I keep laughing like charges to my head, now you
can't. I'm hilarious.
Listen, you are a little bit. I love it. We are honestly. I don't know what day of the week it is. But I'm here. That's all I gotta say. We've picked all of our book clubs for next year for DTW and Inner Circle. We're doing one-on-ones, closing out the year, and so it's just been. As I try to stop and think about it, it's been a lot of fun. And I think it's something interesting when you get to the end of the year and you sort of look back at the things that you plan to do and what you completed, and then looking ahead to the new year. So being able to sort of slot down client projects and curriculum for the first quarter, it just felt good. But then I realized who's going to do all this. And so I got quite a bit of content to record and some boot camps to prep for, but I'm excited. I'm really excited. We have some stuff that it's not even that it's novel, but I think it's when you start realizing how much people need help with particular topics, and then being able to sit down and create a workshop to be able to cover it. I cannot wait for our February workshop. I'm is it February already? I'm just ready. I'm so ready for it. So yes, I guess funny bone aside, we are getting it ready to close out the year. The communities are nice and calm because everybody's on holiday break. So the last few stragglers are in there. And so, yeah, I'm ready. I have my book picked for my break. After we finish this company, I have my book picked, selected, and I'm writing on my cozy for Substack. So I'm gonna just have a week and a half of chillaxing, and I'm ready.
Good.
I'm ready.
Good. Well, man, if anybody ever earned it, you sure did. I want so bad. I'm okay, Rachel, you're recording a podcast. You're here to talk about something specific. You mentioned the cozy, and I just would be like, tell me how it's going. Tell me everything. But now's not the time. And I have to practice self-control. And it upsets me because I want to know now. I don't want to wait for a couple of hours.
Well, that means if anyone else is feeling that way, make sure you head over to the StoryCypher Substack, because I think we're going to put it on mine too, but to be able to talk about the cozy romance, which has been a lot of fun and its own kind of challenge. So I'm excited, and I think I may need some help, child. Okay. With that said, listen, y'all, we're diving in. I hope that you are relaxed and you're ready to just kick it with us for a while. We are continuing our conversation about Ninth House. I just realized I did say kick it. I did mean it too, y'all. I meant it. If you're listening on the podcast, you can't see my face, but my face is so serious. Yes, kick it with us. Next, we talk about Ninth House by, please don't let me mess up her name, Leigh Leigh
Bardugo.
Bardugo. Here we go. Y'all gonna if you're listening, you can't see the book. I'm gonna hold the book up for people who are watching this on YouTube. But we're talking about Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Yeah. And I see you got Hellbent in there too. You
sure when I got Hellbent back there, it is a part of the permanent display. That's how much these books are like both a part of like my favorite books and a part of my brand as a person and an editor.
I feel like you are trying to make me read that book, and I'm trying to wait for the announcement of book 3. I know I'm not going to make it, but I'm trying. So let's go ahead and dive in. Last week, we talked about plot. And this week, we're talking about character. And so, y'all, I'm going to let y'all know again, because we are on our training wheels. Rachel's going to give us the summary again. I believe we should have it so we won't be lost in the sauce. If you think we should do without it, let us know in the comments. However, I do believe I want to ground us, since you probably are like me and you've listened to 50 other podcasts in between. And so we're going to do a summary of Ninth House, and then we're going to talk about characters. So take it away, Rachel.
Let me hit you with a summary. When Alex Stern, a troubled young woman with an uncanny ability to see ghosts, is discovered by the magical underground, she is enrolled into Yale University on a full ride and inducted into a secret society that monitors other secret societies that specialize in different forms of magic. This gritty tale has murder, mystery, and intrigue that explores the thirst for knowledge, justice, and the price we are willing to pay for power. If you don't want to read this book after that summary, I can't help you. There's nothing more I can do for you. It's just...
as your best summary of it. And I'm like, that's not even half of it. It's like this, because when you're reading it, and this is not about characters, I'm sorry, but it does bleed into it. Do you feel like it should have a trigger warning? Or is that something that's not done in this niche like it's done often in romance?
I have to be honest, I don't know, because the emergence of the trigger warning as a thing that people do is already fairly new in the last several years. So whenever I write about this book, I do mention check out the trigger warning database. There might be some content that is, could be upsetting or, triggering. So I always just add a link to that, mostly because I don't know, there have been studies that suggest that trigger warnings actually make it worse. And I'm like, but then we used this book in a program that I worked for, and someone was like, hey, I found this book really triggering and I couldn't finish it. And I hadn't known to warn anyone. So I was like, oh gosh, should I? So I think that this is a new thing in publishing that everyone is trying to figure out, how do we do right by people? And I don't see it as often either in fantasy or traditionally published books in general. I don't think as much. It may be coming it might be increasingly common. This book came out in 2019. So this is a little right before I think we were really getting into being more intentional and more explicit about trigger warnings, at least in fantasy, in the fantasy genre. So I still don't actually know and I'm not sure if it has been established what best practices are for content warnings and stuff like that in books specifically.
I wonder if it's also this fine line between trad and indie, because I believe that if it were indie published, it probably would be at a minimum on the author's website. But when you have traditionally published, their timelines are different. And so something that is common practice in, 2020, when the book was done in 2018 for public, it's handled differently. Okay. So with that said, we're talking about character. Characters are my jam. And I really want us to, try to also kind of hang close to what we were talking about last week when it came to plot. But I felt like Alex's character was so layered and so multifaceted. And when I was writing my notes down, and I'm just going to read through a few of at the top of things that I wrote down when it came to her character, that she evolved in herself, in her abilities, in her role as Dante. And I didn't literally just have like a ton of stuff that I had down. And once the list literally takes up the screen. And once I finished, I was like, oh, this is the perfect sort of conversation to think about. How in depth or how much emphasis do you want to put as a writer on developing a character when you are developing her for multiple books, right? And I think, I mean, you do work in general, but it's something else to have a one POV and you are sticking with her through the duration of, the better parts of 300,000 to 400,000 words, right? And so I'd love to sort of talk a little bit about her, who she is when she comes to this story. And I would also love to talk about some of the things that you mentioned before about how she evolved, right? And how this solving of this crime that she picked up as a part of originally as her part and role as Dante, but then eventually it became this thing that she just had a compulsion to do, almost as if she was doing it like on behalf of herself. I know it's probably a better way of saying that, like doing it for girls like me, or those girls that go unseen. And all the while, it's calling on her to be the person that she's presenting herself as, and also to really come to grips with the person that she is, that she hides very, very well, almost. So yeah, that wasn't a question. So dive in anywhere.
Yeah. So actually, I want to take one step back, and pose a question to you, because you said that, you came with a lot of notes for characters, and she really is this phenomenally layered character. And I think that this is just a quick aside, but I wanted to make sure I didn't miss saying it. One of the ways I think Leigh Bardugo really pulled that off was by pulling on her history and layering her history into the telling of the story so that we can explore those layers. Because what we get all throughout the story is when Alex is faced with a situation, she pulls on knowledge that she has from her past to translate into the present to handle the situation. So when we think about, she's preparing to go talk to Turner for the first time. Turner is Centurion. He's the officer in charge of the Tara Hutchins murder investigation. She thinks back to, when you're in a drug deal, here are the things you need to know. And this is what I know about Turner. So this is how I'm going to handle this situation, right? And so what it does is it is constantly looking back at her past and pulling it into the present and bringing it to bear on how she's handling the situation. And I think that that's one of the ways that Leigh Bardugo helped us to see the many layers and many facets of Alex while also unraveling her backstory. So this story is a great one for looking at how you can use a backstory effectively in the present moment for the protagonist to reveal their character. So, go ahead.
Something about that before you go to the next thought on that. I think that's interesting because I think that is a slippery slope, right?
So
she did it wrong. Exactly. She did it well, but it could because in reality, we do that all the time, right? We utilize our understanding of a situation, our past experience to dictate how we navigate, whether wrong or right. Now, in her case, the past that she was calling upon is something that not only was she using to shape her perspective and her actions, also to hide a lot of layers of herself, but also it's sort of like it's also it's almost like the lens that colors and taints her as well, right? When she said drug deal or her issues with drugs itself, or her very strained relationship with her mother, things like that. And so I feel like she did it great, but it can be a really hard thing to do and manage. But here, I feel as though the past was the present and the present was the past. I don't have any other way to say that. And so it's like this, it's like the time jumping. It merged in such a way. And it just makes me think not only in her writing, but in her relationship potentially with her editor. Like, it had to be this fine line of knowing her really well, knowing Alex well, knowing what parts to call upon at a time so that you can get the most use out of that. So it doesn't even feel as if you are like almost like flashbacks. They felt almost like soft flashbacks. So
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, they were the way, and this is down to like the line writing skills, right, that she used to really narrate past events as almost as though, again, in the narration, as though they were happening presently. But she was very clear, right, to let us know that like this is in the narration. Alex is calling upon a memory, but she gives us ultra specific memories with active narration. So it wasn't, I remembered that Len had taught me this thing. We see a snippet in time of, Len always got a kick out of sending her on to college campuses because officers never stopped a chubby girl in braids. Like she was she's very concise and very specific. And she narrated almost like the active elements rather than trying to just like gloss over it in a summary or expand it out forever so that it's like, this whole scene is a flashback, or the whole thing that we're getting is a flashback. So she really, again, it's just like down to those line writing skills to draw it into a very present, very active narration, and doing it again at extremely relevant moments in the current scene so that we understand why we're getting this information and we're invested in the information because it's helping us, like it's actually moving us forward in our current scene, in the present moment. You know what I mean? Like, and again, that's why it's sort of evidence of how masterfully it was done, because you're like trying to describe it. It's like, what was the past? But it feels like the present. And you're like but that's like how tightly woven it is. This is not meant to be a plug for my Substack, but when I studied Night House as a part of my Substack series, I did a video about her exposition and like trying to unpack how she did this. It was a 40-minute video. I literally, like I was walking through a scene and following the logic. That took 40 minutes for like, I don't know, 2 pages, like to unravel how she did it and pull apart the pieces. And I say that to say that this is how masterfully it was done and how intentionally and how effectively and seamlessly it was integrated.
Well, I hope you put a pin in this when you do like your takeaways, because I think this is something. No, wait, actually, I'll have a question for you, because this was my first time reading her, so I'm not sure if this was a style that she adopted because of this character and this circumstance and this situation, or if that is her writing style in general.
Yeah, I think that stylistically, this is a part of how Leigh Bardugo writes in general. So, The Familiar is one of her was her newest novel that came out this year. We do. I think we see some of that in The Familiar. I read her YA series, the Grishaverse. And you do get some of that, but it's a little bit lighter. It's much lighter touch because we are in YA. So this was her like adult debut. And I think this is where, because it's a series character, like I think we see it the most robustly in this book. And we get some of it in Hellbent as well. So I think that Leigh Bardugo just has extraordinary line writing skills. I just think as a person, maybe she probably is this is one of those things that she's really, really good at.
It sounds like you're about to gush.
Listen, she's my hero, okay? Or, like, she's, I'm just like, Leigh Bardugo, please be my friend. I love you.
Look, so now you really feel, Rachel.
I know, like, this isn't about to be very public, and I'm like, let me just tell the whole internet that Leigh Bardugo is my hero.
Look, it's gonna be in podcast and in video. So go ahead, yes, and for the world to see. So, but I stopped you a little bit, and I apologize. So, looking at her, you took the step back just a little bit before exploring Alex's character, and took us to the line by line writing, but also just the delivery of how we sort of begin to unfold Alex's character. But I think you were going to say something else after that. Did I?
Yeah. So I actually wanted to reflect back to you a question of, like, when you're looking at a character, like when you're trying to look at the qualities of a character, the development of a character, what are you specifically like looking at and looking for? Like, I kind of want to get a feel for your lens, because characters are your jam. It's like, I'm a plot girl, like, through and through. And you have such a head for characters and such a love for characters. So I'm curious about, like, what is the approach that you take to characters, and how, like, what is the lens that you use when you're looking at them?
First of all, you talk about 40 minutes on a couple of pages. I think the first thing is, like, I feel more than anything, and I do that when I'm writing as well, right? It's almost this thing of, like, the moment that you make me care about her, then I'm curious about the parts of her. And so like, some of the things that I wrote down about her was, like, in herself, the fact that, she was an addict, that she was labeled as a bad kid, that she's misunderstood, that she's haunted, that she's an Ivy League kid on scholarship at Yale, I believe I put Mexican American, and I told you this before, because she kept talking about her abuela, and it made me believe that either she was Mexican American or basically she's non-white, and she's in, y'all, pardon me, like, the most, the most white situation you could be in, going to an Ivy League school. I don't know how else to say that. She's a dropout, but she gets a scholarship. So to me, one of the things that kept rising to the surface about this character was all the many things that she does to protect and hide her wounds. I feel like when you are creating a character, it's so interesting to think about their wounds and their secrets, and what they're willing to do to protect them. And once I started seeing her through that lens, I could see the deflection. I could see her attempts to blend, even in one sentence where she was like, oh yeah, that's what girls in situations like this would say. And she would say stuff like that. And to me, it's sort of just, as someone being a Black woman, and in many situations, you get that. She's not a Black woman in many situations, but is a minority on so many levels, and not just her ethnicity, that she is still working to adapt. And it also is this feeling of, because she doesn't feel like she belongs, it always feels like it can be taken away. And that brings in itself a way that you are operating and navigating in the world. And we see that. So when I'm thinking about characters, I'm thinking about, of course, the things of who they are, but what are their secrets? What are their wounds? What is the worst thing that could happen? Because in this story, she made sure that she experienced the worst thing that could happen, like, multiple times, to the point where I want to reread the story just to study Alex, right? So I look at her wounds, the secrets. I look at what are those big stories that define who they believe they are. And her stories are huge. And the way that, again, how she actively peels back those layers, that I just had so many moments when I was reading this story where it was just like, as if she was trying to just grab my heart out of my chest. And so what those stories are that shape her, I think also one of the things that I feel like she did is some of these questions that I'm saying now, she explored, but then she took it a step further. Why I understand why you would look at this as a masterwork, because she explored those same sort of situations, but on different levels, because we have her as a person, we have her as a gifted person, for lack of a better word, and also as a student in academia. And then lastly, being in this secret society-esque type of situation. And I think it's just a huge, like, chaotic ball of like how do you fake it till you make it? How do you get in where you fit in and try to part of my French, keep your shit together? Because Alex on so many levels is like being pulled by a string, and being that she cannot lean up on the crutches that she has relied upon her entire life since she was a preteen. That also is another level. And I feel like it makes it so that she on so many levels embodies the sort of American woman experience, that it is really easy for people probably at different stages of life to identify and to root for Alex, even when she seems unlikable. Because there was some moments I was like, ooh, okay. You brought out that version when she had that knife on the girl at, you know which house she was at, when she got her to when she started coming into her own. I was like, oh, it's like the girl who has street smarts and knows how to use what she needs to get what she needs to get done. And that can be one of those things of self-preservation, but it also can be manipulation. And she uses it sometimes to her detriment, but a lot of times to protect herself. And so all of these things, I think it goes into building the character, whether you are unfolding them at the time that you're writing. But I think it is even better if you know that going in, if you're a person that can write through that lens, right? I know this was a long answer, but, and I guess the final thing that I will say that I didn't say is finding ways to then also make sure there's a sense of almost balance, for lack of a better word, for her, so that she has room to explore those sides of her that are gritty and that listen, she was just trying to survive. She was just trying to do what she had to do to protect herself in a situation where reality she shouldn't have been near, because she was an age appropriate for a lot of the things that she experienced. But then on the other hand, having a sense of seeing the parts of her that, I don't want to say redeemable, but that's the word I think that will be normally used when you're analyzing. But I think for her, it's a sense of seeing how she's protective and she's loyal, and she will go to whatever lengths, even if it's the risk of exposing herself, to protect people she cares about. And so that is also a part of her unfolding. And I think that probably makes me want to read the other books more than anything else, right? Of like, listen, this is where being a romance reader does not serve me, because I want her to be happy. And it's like, I want her to have a happily ever after. That's not the kind of story. And so that makes me nervous for her and nervous for me. But it's this, to see that there are people who care about her. At the end, there were people who were looking for her. There were people, even her mother, sort of. So the point is of like having those moments and balancing it out, like not making them so rough and tough that we don't want to experience her journey. And I think all of that goes into character, because that is our vehicle for navigating plot, for navigating story. And I think because she was so nuanced, it's why the story could be strung out so long.
Yeah.
Because if you were to just sit and look at the progression of events, it was stretched. That could have been more. But because it was layered, it allowed you to sort of slow down the time. It allowed you to still have a slight ticking of a clock. But it also meant, because of that, I think that's why she had to experience so much mentally and physically to keep the interest, through the story. So those are the things. I mean, and I have like a list. I think I said most of the big ones. I want to see if I had, and the something that we did, like, what is the sort of core emotion that we're going for the story? I think that's important because that's also a lens in which we experience their emotions. And I feel like she goes through it. She goes through the ringer. She goes through it with humans. She goes through it with Grays. She goes through it, with her family. She goes through it with herself. She goes through it in the present. She goes through it in the past. Yeah, like, this character is a master in herself, is a masterwork.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I have to, what I should have been doing is like taking notes of like, okay, I want to hit this thing. I want to hit this thing. I want to hit this thing. But I was like engaged, and I was like, shoot, I should have made some notes about like, okay, this is how I want to respond to all these things.
You're going to text me like tonight. I'd be like, podcast is over, man.
That's never. I will sit under your tutelage forever. Okay, so let's see if I can get there's like a couple of things that I want to pull out there. I think one of the things that you're getting at, this is something that, so when I approach characters, I like to pull on my anthropology background because it helps me to like conceptualize how to kind of nuance characters and how, just from a perspective of like, in reality, how people work, to help unpack. Because when you're creating a character like from scratch, for you, Dana, you like your characters, I don't know, they just come out of your head fully fleshed out. I don't know, like you're so good with characters. They're like alive in your head already, and then they just come out on the page. That's how it feels. It's like they just already exist.
They're steeping like tea. And so when it comes out, it is because there's a certain moment when I'm like, I'm ready to write them. Like, I'm ready for it to come out. And that's probably why, like, in this case, like, it's almost like you see the layers and it's like, oh, that's so good. And when you have conversations like this, you don't even realize that you've experienced certain things because it was so ingrained in the experience that it was like, oh, wow, she did a really great job with that. But keep going.
Yeah. Well, and I think that like, one of the ways that I would kind of categorize what you're talking about with some of these layers to who Alex is as a person, I would almost categorize them like identities, right? The identities that she holds. And you might have even already used that word. But like, right, it's the way that it's the labels, like you said, that have been put on her, that she has put on herself, but also like, even like technical labels, like I'm a freshman at Yale, or I'm Dante, right? In the Lethe hierarchy. And so what you're doing is you have all of these aspects of her character that you have room to explore that are also having to coexist in the same person, right? So what you see in this story is those things bumping into each other. Like, I'm a survivor, I look out for number one, but also I'm Dante and I have a responsibility to Lethe. And it's sort of like, oh, well, if I do my responsibility to Lethe, then I satisfy the survivor because I need to make sure that I keep this opportunity because Yale is my ticket to normal life, right? And so you're watching these facets of her character talk to each other in a way, right? Where they're all kind of where she is trying to find out, like, what am I leaning on right now? Who am I? Where do I need to, what needs to come forward, what needs to like come back. And I think that one of the ways, because you were talking about the story stretching and then you have all of the complexity of these identities. And I think that this is going to come back to plot just a little bit, but she also had a plot that was going to sustain that exploration, right? So like the case and the mystery and the things that Alex had to do in order to unravel the mystery, right, was complementing the amount of character that we were going to explore. So seeing those two things working together in tandem, right, where we talked about last week, the plot driving that character transformation, the plot literally being designed to challenge Alex, the person, to, right, so she has Darlington taken away from her. So now she's the highest ranking student officer of Lethe. And she's the person who feels the least qualified to be in that position. And she is more of an outsider than anybody else at Lethe, right? Because she's not just, right, she has this ability to see grays, but she doesn't come from Yale. She doesn't come from the Ivy Leagues. She comes literally from across the country already. And she doesn't know about magic. Her training with Virgil, with Darlington, right, got cut short. Like, she's like the least qualified, and she's the highest ranking student officer in Lethe. And so you have a plot that is twisty enough, right? Because of all the I don't want to spoil anything. The hoops that Alex has to jump through in order to maintain and continue her investigation is creating an environment where we can explore those facets of her character and lean into the stretch, because you have all these different plot points that are challenging who she is and forcing her to wrestle with those different identities throughout the story. And all of this is contributing to that arc of self-understanding that Alex is having to go through.
That is so good. As you were talking about that, it made me think of two questions that I love to ask, especially like when I'm doing my character workshop, and it's like, why this character? Why now? And that's what you're talking about too, right? When I think about the wrestle that Alex goes through, I also you realize quickly that all of those things, and this is a sign of a character, all of those things that they see as a negative are the skills she has to call upon to be able to solve this crime. A lot of her fearlessness, a lot of her willingness to sort of plant her feet and get ready for whatever head on. There were a couple of scenes where I was like, no, like I could see it. And you see her just, I just like, when there was that one scene where she was in the cab, and I was like, just let the baby go to sleep. Just let her go home. Let her go home, just go to sleep, put a blanket, get us something warm. Like, and it's like, no, it's not over. And this may go back a little bit to plot. Y'all, I'm sorry, we're going to get this together. But I felt like the Leigh, God, listen, if you're watching this one day in the future, I do not mean no disrespect. Like calling her by her first name as if I know her. But I really love the fact that it's like, as brain fart, but as she is going through the story and it's like evolving, you're right there with her, but it's also this thing of, it's like she can't quit, but at the same time, she doesn't want to go forward. And all the while, it's almost like, because of the life that she lived, always running from the things that people couldn't see, it has her on this high alert. And this whole time, it felt like she was always, I don't even know what it's called, like always on. Like always on. There was like a couple of scenes, like when she went to Darlington's place, where she got a little bit of reprieve, but I felt like every moment and every turn, the author just kept upping the ante. Right when you felt like this girl can't go through anything else, she said, lies you tell. Watch me.
That's right, wrong. It's just
Get your notepad, watch your master work. And I just was like, as someone who is low conflict in Like I just want everybody to be happy. It was something to watch her continue to up those stakes, and to the point where the story reached not just an unknown for Alex, but an unknown for everyone. And I don't know, because I haven't read the story. I've only read it like twice, and I haven't studied it. But I know that's got to be something. I'm gonna figure it out. But meaning, like in the beginning, Alex's everything was unknown to her, right? She's trying to figure everything out. And then it reaches a point where, they all know just about as much as she knows. And she's I don't want to say the underdog, maybe. She's no longer the only one that's sort of like pedaling against the grain or trying to figure out what's going on. But now she's actually leading the charge in this investigation, and her understanding and her perspective and her insight and her gut instinct, even when she's doing the things that are against protocol, is what's called for to right the wrongs that are at play. And I think that evolution for her character, yes, it could be the normal character evolution and arc, but I felt like it was something else. And I think the something else that I'm feeling is because it's a book one, but it's almost like she got a little bit of footing while still understanding that I'm not out of harm's way. I'm not out of, probation at the school. I'm not out of potentially getting kicked out of Yale. I'm still in deep water, but I'm feeling a little bit more confident in my abilities, or even in the fact that I'm doing this in my decision making, Yeah, it makes me not want to read it all over again.
Yeah, I do. I think what I'm hoping is going to happen is it's going to get you wanting to read the first book again. Then you're like, well, no, I have to read the second book. Then we can finally talk about it, because I've just been sitting on this knowledge and it's killing me. But I think that one of the things that you're picking up, and this is going to be, like a little bit of a trek back to plot, and everybody's going to be okay, because there's just literally, we are talking for hours about this book and still haven't hit everything that we want to talk about the book. But I think some of this is kind of like a series thing, because even as Alex gets her footing and she understands her power a little bit better, she understands how the houses of the Vale work purely by experience, right? She's been to different houses. She's starting to understand the mechanics and the politics that kind of go into the way that the houses of the Vale work overall. So she is kind of getting a little bit up to speed on the basics of, being in Lethe and being a part of the houses of the Vale. She's still trying to stay up on everything at Yale as just like a regular old student. So those stakes kind of stay up there. But I think that what happens is we get through the first book and she starts to get her footing. But because we're in a series, part of the way that Leigh Bardugo takes us into really further escalating the stakes and continuing that conflict is that the world expands that little bit more, right? And so that's one of the things that you'll see across series. And I find this often with fantasy in particular, where the protagonist and whoever the protagonist, their friends, allies, etc., they come to an understanding of the world, but what they discover is that the world is simply bigger than they realized. And so it opens up this space for exploration across the series where the world is expanding. So even as the protagonist is expanding in their ability, the world has already outpaced them because the world is bigger than they realize. So they come to these realizations, and that also enables you to continue challenging the protagonist. So the protagonist gets better at what they do. They get get better with their gift, but the world is more complex than they realized. And so they're having to continue growing and adapting. And so she's kind of setting Alex up so that Alex is prepared, like she's in a position where she can undertake the challenges of the second book, but she is going to be challenged. They're going to push her limits all over again, right? So it's the characters growing, and so is the world, and so is the conflict. And that's a classic kind of series thing to do. And it's usually what you're looking for in a series, right? Because if you're going to do a series, you got to keep challenging the protagonist. If it's like a chronological series versus like, because I think about, romance series where what happens is you have different couples, right? And that's rather than the chronology of a central plot moving across 3 books.
Right. And yes, I was going to say that. And I think even just I would say even not just in the scope of a series, but in the scope of something that's meant to be like a trilogy or a saga or however you want to call 4 books, because the interconnected plot and the continuation of the character's growth. And so, yes, I totally agree. And the same would be true when you're doing that in romance. But the reality is you don't have a whole lot that continue to explore with the same couple. So that does make some slight adjustments, but to the world itself, even in a contemporary stance, it can set, because in the first book, it's usually sort of almost like collapsing in on them. And then the book 2 is usually like taking that element and moving out further into the world and seeing what the ramifications are outside of their immediate, almost like, what do you want to call the concentric circles kind of that goes out, like just sort of expands. So yes. So with that said, as we kind of come to the end of this conversation, if you have not realized that you just want to read this book, I don't know what you're doing with your life.
We can't help. We can't do any more between the summary and this discussion. If you were like, this book is not for me, I'm like, you know what? It probably isn't that. If you hear all this and you're like, not my thing, it's like, you're probably right. That obviously,
this is like the tip of the iceberg. But I will say, so a couple of things that we maybe want to think about is a few questions to sort of take away as you are thinking about writing a story. I think, first of all, like, again, I'm almost charged myself of like, I see why this is a masterwork. Also a masterwork in character when it comes to the protagonist. And we haven't even touched the grays. We have not even touched like the secondary characters. Like we haven't even and they, oh my gosh, the grays. Oh my gosh. Okay. So with that said, what are some things or some questions that people or writers can consider when they are wanting to write their own Alex or create a very dynamic character? And let's say in the scope of what we have here, that it's for a multi-book situation, and this same protagonist is the one that we're rocking with, for that whole story. What are some of those questions that you think a writer should consider as they're working on developing that character?
Yeah, I would probably start with, well, not start with, but the first thing that I'm thinking of is, if you want a nuanced character like that, and especially someone we're going to hang with for a series, you really do want to look at the different identities that that this protagonist has in life and in the environment, right? Because we're going to be spending a lot of time with this person, which means we're going to be exploring multiple facets of this character. And I would also be wanting to think about, how are these identities in conflict with each other, right? Like even like what identities has the protagonist taken on that are not true, right? Or that are based on a false sense of self. That is a huge one that, especially I think like for your book 1, but even if I wanted to say, especially for a book 1, but even if, depending on the kind of development that you want the protagonist to undergo over the course of the series, they might not realize that until book 3, right? Where there's like this whole idea. Exactly. So I would look at thinking through the different identities and then looking for how they come into conflict with each other and how the plot of the story is going to challenge those identities. Those are some of the like kind of pillars I'd be looking for to help you develop a protagonist and then chart the course forward for them of how they're going to grow and how they're going to develop. And I do want to say one last side thing, because we didn't get a chance to touch on secondary characters. I had a note about secondary characters. I wanted to talk about secondary characters. There was just not enough hours in the day. But I want to say a couple of things for writers thinking about their secondary characters. Number one, I would think about your secondary characters and their roles within the setting. Their roles and their I say identities. I don't know that you will go quite as in depth on the identities of your secondary characters, but I am thinking about their relationship within the setting, right? Like their relationship to the setting that the story is taking place in. Because, right, we have someone like Alex who is a quintessential in every conceivable way outsider. Well, who are the insiders? What are they like? How do they respond to the protagonist and the protagonist's identities, right? Like, so you're thinking about how the secondary characters are in relationship to the setting, because that setting is going to bring them into contact with your protagonist, but also thinking about what kind of characters does my protagonist need to meet to help them grow, right? Like, who are the people they're going to meet along the way that are going to challenge them, that are going to support them, that are going to act in juxtaposition, right? Act in contrast. I think, Darlington and Dawes in particular. So Dawes is Oculus, Darlington is Virgil, and Dawes is, right, much more timid. She's a strong contrast to Alex, but she provides essential support. And Alex actually helps Dawes grow a little bit and become more assertive and become a little bit stronger. Darlington is very oriented around the rules and doing things the right way and kind of having a virtue about you. And he's very put together. And he is a powerful contrast to Alex, right? And so you want to think about how the characters are going to operate in comparison and in contrast to your protagonist so that they can sharpen each other's edges, right? You can find the conflict and the growth and the development among your protagonist and the secondary characters as they all go through the plot together or experience the repercussions of the plot.
Mm-hmm. A couple things I'll piggyback on that. The first thing I'll say, first of all, absolutely agree. I would say that even as you're looking at those secondary characters, you do still want to explore, like, what are their goals? What is the conflict? What are their motivations? There's an author that I love, and I wish I remember who it was. And she talks about how things in life kind of bump into your happy, right? And how do these characters sort of bump into Alex's? It's not her happy, but it's her good for now. And she don't want to mess up her good for now. The other thing that I think is important for a protagonist is to really start considering what are the things that color their perspective and their lens for how they see things. We see it a lot in Alex's actions, but even in her mindset, right? It's like when she's in any sort of situation with someone that is of authority, she almost always goes back to a drug deal or she's always ready to fight. And oh God, I wish we've got to do something else with this, because there's some scenes that I would love to just talk about those scenes. But the point is, understanding what the circumstances are that colored their lens, your characters are usually operating from a sense of a falsity that they've adopted as a truth. So the more that you understand what that is, the more you also can understand how they interact and engage with their environment, with the secondary characters, with the challenges that they're up against. And it also begins to help you to uncover how best to challenge them as a person to become the version of themselves that you want them to be at the end of the story. And I think the more you think about that, you can have something that is mildly paced or even lower stakes and still have a sense of intensity and conflict there, because the reality is most people, even if they don't like their situation, if they're comfortable there, I'm air quoting if you're listening, if they're comfortable, they do not want to be uncomfortable. And that's where you're pulling them to if you want us to be invested as readers. And I think the more that you explore that and how that evolves and how you, as the writer, begin to see it, and then transfer it to the page, I think it just makes for stories like these that you feel and process on so many levels of why you can go back and read it again and again and still see things that you didn't see before. And it makes it fun. It makes it a lot of fun to write. Are there any other little tips that you want to give before we close out this episode on your notes?
You know what? Let me just throw in one more that I was thinking about. Just because I think it's a common pitfall that that we see in books, or see with our writers. If you have and we talked about this last week, but I'm going to say it again because I think it's that important. If you have a character that is like kind of rough around the edges or has a long way to go, especially if you have, I think in particular, a combative character, draw out what their redeeming qualities are. And I think in particular, when you have a combative character, when you show them using that combativeness in service of another, what you're looking to do is show us why we should keep hanging out with this character, even if they're a little rough. We need to see that, because I think about, we've all, I think, read that book where you have the, I'm now using air quotes, edgy female character who is honestly, right, she just kind of is like picking fights and you can't tell why, or like she's just sort of like, I'm edgy, which means I'm mad at everyone all the time, even if it doesn't quite seem appropriate in the moment. And it's right, and she lacks the nuance of seeing the different facets of her, or seeing her use that in for any good reason. And it becomes almost like a redundant quality where it's, again, she becomes two-dimensional and she's just, again, like edgy girl TM. And that's just all that she does. And so you lose any sense of it, right? What you're going to do is you're going to, at least me, you're going to irritate this reader. That's for darn sure, because it's like, again, it is two-dimensional. And so I think identities are going to help with this, because it's going to help you pull out different facets of that character rather than just banging that one drum. And it's also, you're going to find those redeeming qualities. And when, if she's rough around the edges, when she uses that to protect other people and to care for others, or even if it's in a moment that this is her best evaluation of the only way forward, whatever that is. But when you add in that nuance and add in that gift and those redeeming qualities, so that we don't feel like we've wound up with a flat character who is just doing the same thing all the time. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think sometimes when this conversation is had in general, people fall back on archetypes, but I think it's more than an archetype, right? An archetype can be sort of like your foundation or maybe your beginning point, especially if you are not as familiar with character types. But I think what you're bringing in is that it's almost like you are, I don't want to say it, but I got to. It's almost like you're manufacturing a sense of balance until you know enough about their story to fill in those gaps. So that's almost like in the beginning why you have to be fluid, and you may put those things down. I always say put them down in pencil, right? Put them down in pencil so that as you learn more about that character and they bump around in your head, or you see them navigate through different scenes, you may stop and say, well, why would they behave that way? Why is this their first response? Is this a natural response? And if so, what sort of memory, what did we tap into that caused them to it's almost like it's again a sense of self-preservation, right? And that it comes off as I'm a bad chick, but it's mainly because I'm gonna get you before you get me, and you want to still balance that out. Are there any other things that you want to add before we close out this episode?
I think, and nothing else barring, another hour of conversation about characters.
We don't have it. And if we had it, we would be here alone. Okay. People would be like, no, I'm out. I wouldn't try to see if I had any. Yeah, I think you touched it. I'm looking at some of the notes that I had down in her abilities, and you talked about all of them. I had here grounded in her humanity in the most inhumane situations. That she knows how to keep a secret, and that she knows how to use what people think they know about her to her advantage. Oh. Ooh. And deep down, this is it. This is the lesson. It's like the same cat moment. Deep down, she wants to belong. She just doesn't feel safe to feel that. And I think, because I've only read one book, I think that that's where the deepest part of her journey will lie. Right? Because we see it a little bit towards the end of the story where she's starting to forge these relationships that seem unlikely, but a necessity. And she is used to using people in a sense for necessity. And I think that's going to be a part of her journey. So with that said, thank you all so much for joining us for another episode of Story Deep Dive. Listen, if you are still here, you are going to be an OG around here. We will see you for our next episode as we continue our conversation about Ninth House. And we'll see you really, really soon.